Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim, and this episode we are going to focus on three things. We want to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. We want to talk about top 50 players in the 2025 NFL Draft. We want to talk about how an interactive mock draft simulator works. So we're going to use the NFL Draft Fanatics mock draft simulator. They sponsor this podcast. And what we will do is we will pick Seattle, and we will pick a second round challenge, and we will enter the draft. A second round challenge is 10 unique 2-round drafts. And this will take about 10 or 15 minutes to do. So what we will do is it's already gone through and done its mock. So for round one, so none of the players I was thinking of were available, so they were taken earlier. So let's talk about Josh Connerly, offensive tackle from Oregon, going in round one to Seattle. And then in round two, let's talk about Barrett Carter, the linebacker from Clemson, going to Seattle. Okay, so the player board I'm using, I have 4 of them in front of me. The primary one is from Kyle Krabs in the 33rd team. If you are not familiar with Kyle's work, follow 33rd team, follow Locked On NFL Scouting. And Kyle puts out a big board, and otherwise his podcast content is quite good. More players to talk about. So let's look up Josh Simmons. So observe that Josh Simmons right now is player 318 on the board. I'm going to take him in round one for Seattle. Okay. In round two, we want to talk about Lander Barton. So observe that Barton is player 269 on the Seattle board right now. I'm going to take him in round two. So with an interactive simulator, every single time you pick the player, they're going to move up the draft board. If any player I skip moves down the board a little bit. Okay. So I've taken 2 offensive tackles, Josh Connerly, Josh Simmons. I've taken 2 linebackers, Barrett Carter, Lander Barton. This is my 3rd unique mock draft that I'm doing. So another player we should talk about as a top player in this draft class is Malike Starks, safety from Georgia. And in the second round, we want to talk about Ajani Cornelius, offensive tackle from Oregon. Observe he's player 439 on the board at the time I picked him. Okay. Another player to talk about would be cornerback Denzel Burke from Ohio State in round one to Seattle. Top 50 player. And then let's talk about some other safeties. So safety in the top 50, Xavier Wankpa from Iowa. Okay. A round one player to talk about, Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama. Observe he's player 43 in the big board right now. Okay. Another safety in the top 50, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, currently ranked 84. At this point, I have done 5 of 10 2-round mocks, so I'm halfway done. You can see Burke moved up relative to the last time that I picked him. Okay, a player, I think if Drew Alar is there at the time that Seattle picks, I think that's a good pick. Observe that Alar is currently 28th on the Seattle board. I'm picking him in round 1. Another safety in the top 50, Keon Sabb from Alabama. Observe that he's player 123 on the board right now. Okay. Another quarterback to talk about to Seattle in round 1. Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Observe that Nussmeier is currently 322 on the Seattle board. Another safety to talk about. Nick Emmanwori from South Carolina, currently 461 on the Seattle board. Okay, at this point, I have finished 7 of the 10 unique 2-round mocks. I have 3 more to go. Okay. Another player to talk about in round 1 is Ed Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. Observe he's player 57 on the Seattle board at the time that I picked. Every player you pick on this simulator moves up after you pick them. Okay. Another player to talk about in the top 50 is Landon Jackson, defensive lineman from Arkansas. I have done 8 of the 10 2-round mocks. 2 more to go. You can see Stewart moved from 50-something to 46 by me picking him once in round 1. Let's talk about De'Am Walker, defensive lineman from Kentucky, going in round 1 to Seattle. He was 30th on the board at the time that I picked. Let's talk about Wyatt Millam, offensive tackle from West Virginia, to Seattle in round 2. Millam was 97th on the Seattle board at the time that I picked him. Okay, this is my 10th and final mock of the second round challenge. And so let's talk about Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas. He's 29th at the time that I picked him. We'll take him in round 1 to Seattle. And then we will talk about Tate Ratledge, guard from Georgia. Ratledge is 75 at the time that I picked him. And I took him in round 2. Okay, so let's review all of the players that I just took. All of these players are in the top 50 of the big board that I am using. Josh Connerly, offensive tackle from Oregon, round 1. Barrett Carter, linebacker from Clemson, round 2. Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State, round 1. Round 2, Lander Barton, linebacker, Utah. Round 1, Malike Stark, safety from Georgia. Round 2, Ajani Cornelius, offensive tackle from Oregon. Round 1, Denzel Burke, corner from Ohio State. Round 2, Xavier Wangpa, safety from Iowa. Round 1, Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama. Round 2, Xavier Watts, safety from Notre Dame. Round 1, Drew Alar, quarterback from Penn State. Round 2, Keon Sabb, safety from Alabama. Round 1, Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback from LSU. Round 2, Nick Emmanwori, safety from South Carolina. Round 1, Shamar Stewart, edge from Texas A&M. Round 2, Landon Jackson, defensive lineman from Arkansas. Round 1, Deion Walker, defensive lineman from Kentucky. Round 2, Wyatt Millam, offensive tackle from West Virginia. Round 1, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas. Round 2, Tate Ratledge, guard from Georgia. I mentioned this is an interactive mock draft simulator. And if you go to the team needs section of the website, and you scroll down to the team that you're interested in this case, Seattle, okay, and we look at the player list. So if you look on the far right side, you'll see a player list for Seattle. This is the Seattle player board that the simulator uses. So let's look at Bond. He was 30th at the time that I picked him in the first round. He moved up one spot to 29. If we look at Ratledge was 75th on the board at the time I picked him. I picked him once in the second round. He moved up 20 spots to 55. Let's look at Millam. Okay. Millam moved up to 74th when I picked him in round 2. Let's look at Emmanwori. He was in the 200s at the time I picked him. I picked him once in round 2. He moved up to 114. Let's look at Nussmeier. Nussmeier, again, he was somewhere in like the 100s, 200s at the time I picked him. I picked him in round 1. He moved up to 83. So you notice in this case, like Nussmeier doesn't go from like 200 or 250 on the big board all the way into the top 20. If you want Nussmeier to move up more, you need to pick him again. So one way to do that real quickly for Seattle here is I'm going to go and open up single player. We're going to do this thing called the first round challenge, and I'll pick Seattle. So a first round challenge is much faster. It's 5 first round picks. So we're just going to focus on the first round part of Seattle's board. And if I say, okay, so we would go Alar. He's currently 28th on the board. I'll pick him there. And then we'll go Milrow, who's 38th. Let's go to Nussmeier, who's 83rd. And then who are my next 2 best picks for Seattle? Let's go offensive tackle. Let's go Connerly. And let's go Simmons. Okay. So I just took Drew Alar, Jalen Milrow, Garrett Nussmeier, Josh Connerly, and Josh Simmons as 5 first-round picks for the Seattle. So I just did 5 very quick first-round picks for Seattle, right? So if we look at Nussmeier, he was 83rd, and I'm going to refresh this page. And Nussmeier moved up 30 more spots because I took him in round 1 again. And if we look at Milrow, for example, Milrow went from 38th to 34th. And Alar went up a couple spots to 28. So you can see that, like, even Alar, I picked him in the first round twice, right? I did it once with the second round challenge and once with the first round challenge. And he only moved up a couple spots. To get Alar to move all the way to the top of the Seattle board is probably going to take close to 30 mock drafts alone just to get Alar there. If you want Alar next to Milrow, next to Nussmeier, right? Where like, you can tell me which order you would want the quarterbacks in, but if you want all three of them there, you're probably talking about close to 80 to 90 mock drafts to get those three quarterbacks to be right next to each other on the player board. So if you are that person who's going to do those 90 mock drafts, you are the fanatic that we are looking for. Those are definitely the types of people that make a simulator like this work for fans of all 32 teams. Because if you are going to take the time to set Seattle's board up that way, no matter what other teams do, no matter what fans of other teams do, doing mock drafts, more than likely a good player is going to come to Seattle that Seattle fans would say, yeah, if the board fell that way, that's likely the player that we would want. So the interactive mock draft simulator is fans of all 32 teams doing mock drafts against each other. You're not doing it in real time. It's storing the information on player boards, but it's still, all of your mock drafts are going to be influenced by fans of all 32 teams. So this is the Mrs. R Relevant podcast. We are sponsored by NFLDraftFanatics.com. You can find us on Twitter and YouTube. So if you have any questions on what you've seen, drop a comment on YouTube, drop a comment on Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. This podcast channel has content every day. We talk about top 50 players like we just did here. We talk about college football matchups where draftable players go up against each other. We have content already out there that's highlighting 200 to 250 players in the draft class in a single podcast. And we talk about them a little bit. Okay. We will have positional rankings episodes that start late October and November. And if you like, follow and subscribe on YouTube and Twitter, you will be notified of when that content is going to be created. So my name's Jim. On behalf of NFL Draft Fanatics and Mrs. R Relevant, thank you very much for listening. And remember, every day is draft day if you have the right attitude. Thank you very much.